Hey, everybody, welcome to Formalism Friday. Today, our special guests are Sean Michael Robinson, Carson Grubaugh, and Brandon Graham. How you guys doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Pretty good. I have my RE20 on, so I figured I needed to do my radio voice, you know.
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep, like then I get a lot of fangirl mail, so.
That's a problem, yeah. Tiger Beat won't leave you alone.
Yeah. I gotta talk higher.
You know, I can't even tell you the amount of emails that I've gotten that said Carson Grubaugh is the Jonathan Taylor Thomas of comics.
JTT.
Yeah. And if you take the camera off. So speaking of filmic references,
man, can we use that as a blurb, Brandon?
Oh, please.
Yeah.
The JT.
We got it on record.
The JTT and CMYK. That's something else. So I don't know about you guys. We talk about camera sometimes. You guys think that it's a little weird to talk about camera when we're not actually literally talking about a camera?
I have no problems with it because I mean it's a clear way to express what we're talking about, and you know, so much, you know, I think comics is it's both a cousin of kind of books and of like prose and film. So if you can pull from both, then
yeah, I don't think it's any coincidence that the modern comic came around the same time as photography. And I still maintain that somebody like Edward Muybridge is like one of the biggest like comics influences of all time, just by taking sequential images and placing them in sequence for you to see the sequence. It's just like it's doing something different. But yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about the viewpoint today. And Carson has flagged two different pages. I'd like to take a look at the Phoenix page first. We actually talked about this page when we looked at Phoenix Volume 1, Carson and I. And this character is trapped inside of a volcano, and for the first time that he is actually experiencing he's basically tunneled himself out, and he realizes, oh, I'm totally trapped here. And you get an actual view of his location and just see how incomprehensibly, high up he'd have to climb in order to get out. And nice scope on that first panel where you've got the tiny little figure on the bottom there, and you get a real feeling for it, and hits the lighting down on him. And then the sequence of moment to moment transitions on the bottom here is really interesting. So this reads left to right because it was flipped. We have this sort of impossible dolly motion into his face. I say impossible because a dolly in like a traditional sense would have to have tracks laid for it, but if you see, we're going down as we're going towards him, and it sort of curves around the side of his face, so that by the last image there, not only are we close to him, but we're actually slightly behind him and sort of looking into the side. And it just, something about this is just like, so, you might be tempted to call it cinematic, but basically, unless you had a helicopter there, this would be an impossible thing to actually do in, a real cinematic context, which I suppose
you could use a drone in these days, but I guess that's kind of beside the point. It's really fascinating to look at because my initial response to it is that I feel like if you reverse this entire page, where the last panel was the first panel and the giant page panel was the last panel, it seems like it would be more effective. So it's interesting that you didn't do that.
That's why I flagged this one though, because it feels backward. So even if you did, and this is why I think impossible dolly actually makes more sense to me than even your suggestion, Sean, is you could do this with the drone or have a camera on a track, but the camera pans from up and then it pans to the left and back behind him, but the motion across the page moves this way. And even if you flip that, accounting for the fact that this has been flipped, then the problem just reverses itself, right? So the camera is panning against the grain of the flow of the panels. And Tezuka does that a lot, and and I've seen it in his work that's not been flipped too. He'll have a camera pan like right while the panel, you're reading across to the left, and it creates a really weird like friction of
it's slower too.
Yeah, because it's like they're crossing each other in a really weird way. And that's the other one is an example of like the camera's panning right as you read right. And that doesn't have that same friction, right? You just kind of flow around. And this is from the Rorschach book by Tom King and George or Jorge Fornes, just
Yeah,
so
and
that traders get credit.
we should say that the people who don't know this, there is a general tendency, if you're making something that reads left to right, to make your action flow left to right. You know, that is definitely the speediest kind of thing. And there are creators who do nothing but left to right motion.
Yeah, Hergé and Tintin would actually go back when he would rework Tintin books and change things going from left to right that he hadn't before, just to make the reading smoother.
Wow.
and Jim Woodring's stuff is another person who has a very, like, my characters are walking in the direction that you're going to read kind of flow to it. And when it's subverted, you're definitely aware of the subversion. And Tezuka does most of the time too. So yeah, it is interesting. When he does something like this, I really do wonder if it's like consciously like a speed adjustment, or whether it's just sort of, you know, he's wanting this moment to have as much lengthy impact as possible.
Yeah, I guess if it went the way you expected, it might almost just be easily digested and go on. It does make me think that going the left to right thing, that in the instances in a story where you want to backtrack, it's a good excuse to have the character go the opposite direction and be like, oh, I forgot my keys. Let me go back against the grain of the reading.
Yeah.
I really like the rocks in this are such, I feel like this is a cruel thing to put this and the other book next to each other, because this is like this thing where you look at the rocks and you're like, look at that Tezuka rock. And the other thing looks like a TV script.
Right.
You know, and it's just like, it's a super competent, like spinning around thing. But I was just like, I don't think the writer of this like thought of it as a visual thing. I think he was like, you know, thinking of it as a Friends episode or something. You know? Right.
Yeah, and that's the thing about that. Like, 3 camera setups are really interesting and like don't interfere with, you know. Okay, so we should back up. You know, traditional sitcoms were shot in what's called a 3 camera style, and you'd have one camera for the master shot that is far enough back to see your presumably 2 or 3 actors, and then you have 2 cameras that are set up that enable you to have like a middle shot or semi close up of the 2 actors, and these things will be edited sometimes live, where the 3 feeds are being sent to the producer who's there, and it's saying camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, camera 1. And, you know, he's got the script, he or she's got the script and is going in on the fly, making those kinds of things. And when you're doing something that's dialogue heavy, that type of selection in your comic seems to make a lot of sense, because the only thing you're really taking in is the acting. But when you're not doing something dialogue heavy, I don't know exactly why you limit yourself.
Well, and this is a book and a scene where there's a lot of like it's a very political book, so they're giving a lot of like dialogue heavy kind of information in this scene. And you know, I think like to judge this as like a bad instance of overly cinematic or overly like television filmic type of stuff, we would have to really go read the whole book and see if there's a reason why, because Tom King is a pretty.
No, I'm not knocking this particular example. I'm just just noting how this is there. You also wouldn't do this in a three camera setup anyway.
Sure.
No, this is like a 1 camera pan. Yeah.
The only Tom King thing I've read is the issue where Frank Miller shows up in his Rorschach. So part of me is just like, well, this guy doesn't fucking know what he's doing. So
no,
that might be a rude, disingenuous.
The Rorschach book's a little weird. His run on his 12-issue Vision miniseries is like.
I heard good things. I actually met the artist of that and got a great Arzak drawing from him in Italy.
Walta, Gabriel Walta.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And so Tom King's like a hit or miss. They're either some of the best fucking stuff I've read, or it's like, dude, what are you doing? So I think he's just trying stuff.
Well, I guess the specific comparison I was making is just that somebody like Tezuka is not limiting himself to that kind of cross-cutting, where everything is fixed. And, you know, it seems like that's a strategy that's really useful for when the acting is the thing that takes the primacy. But when, you know, you're trying to create a moment of drama, you know, you pull out everything that you've got. And, you know, I just, when I see something like that and I think about it in a film context, I just think, how expensive would it be to stop shooting so you can lay dolly track that's going to be like 15 feet up in the air and then end on the
Yeah.
ground. I mean, it's just you know.
Yeah, and I mean,
It's both filmic and impractical and or impossible, you know, which is a nice sweet spot.
and he's obviously so influenced by film and animation, but he does do those weird things where like he bends it and warps it in a way that only a comic could.
Yeah, he knows it's not a film, and
yeah,
you know and is incredibly attuned to the production side of it. Like you talked about those Tezuka rocks, man, oh man, I just read a couple months ago the biography that was made by his studio after he died. And it's very, very interesting to see how he communicated those things to his assistants. I say assistants. I mean, he probably didn't draw any of those rocks, but the style would have been notated on the top. So he would have drawn the contour for it and then written, you know, hey, you're going to want to use this style. And they would have like references to look for, like things that he had done previously, like the style of hatching and everything like that. It's a quite impressive way of making something that was made by many hands look like it's the work of one person.
Yeah, I always thought Urasawa was very good at working with assistants. It feels like personal, but then, you know, he'll have a city and he doesn't need to have his line on every building, but it helps to have. Actually, if you show the rock panel again, I think there's something interesting that's going on there too, where the top rocks that he's doing in the more dramatic big panel are almost a little bit more realistic, and then in the down shot they're just these little things. It's almost like cartooning it up in the secondary shot.
But then going back to the realism here a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I always have a problem with, like, if I drew the top panel first, I'd be like, and then this exact kind of rock here. But I like that he's like allowed himself to do it with less detail.
And Sean, you're saying he would have made notes, like if he didn't draw these himself, he would have made notes to say cartoon rocks here, realistic rocks here.
I would bet good money that those cartoon rocks in the first two panels on the bottom were penciled in by him. Yeah. And at the top, he's got the general contour of the thing and then indicated the type of hatching through his own system, including which tone to lay down and stuff like that. So he probably, that beam there would have been in pencil and the general shape would have been in pencil. And the general shape of the sort of bowl of the rocks down there lightly in pencil as well. But yeah, so he indicated the different types of hatching he was looking for and the different types of tone he had for it. And they had a whole system for it worked out. I'll do a flip through that book sometime, or maybe we could all talk about it at some point. It's a fantastic book. It's very interesting. Yeah. It's hagiographic, you know. It's not it's too complimentary to its subject, but the actual technical information is incredibly interesting.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. We were talking before. I have this Miyazaki Starting Point book where he writes a eulogy to Tezuka and kind of rips apart his issues with his work. It's called, like, When I Saw the Hand of God in Him, I Stopped Paying Attention.
Oh,
yeah, because his argument is basically that Tezuka did so much work that sometimes he had these kind of shorthands. You know, Miyazaki's really critical of people not putting their own life experience into their work, and he hates that artists are basically getting their information on stories from other work and then kind of just Xeroxing it and creating more and more work. I feel slightly differently because I feel like it's about your personal experience, and so you can take another piece of work and your work can almost be like, this is my reaction to that work, and I think that's totally valid. But yeah, with Miyazaki and Tezuka, he was basically saying that he had these, like, he would try to show emotions. You know, I often refer to, like, a Steven Spielberg style director as like an emotional bully, because he really lets you know with music and cinematography exactly how he wants you to feel. It's like, you are sad right now. And I think I feel like sometimes Miyazaki wants you to basically, like, he's going to tell the story and how you feel about it. He's not trying to manipulate that as much as this is just what's going on in the story. Where he basically says that Tezuka was like, he talks about how there's a sequence of guards entering a city and there'll be like a doll on the ground and showing a boot stepping on a child's doll. And once he saw that happen like 3 times in Tezuka stuff, he was just like, this is nothing from your own life. This is just you, like you have a thing that you have a tool that you're pulling out again.
Yeah.
It's part of the criticism that when you're as prolific as Tezuka was, there's no time to go live life.
I don't know if he actually says that, but that's certainly something that I got from it. And I think it's really important. It might be like, I mean, sometimes I think about sitting at a desk, for 10 hours a day and wiggling a pencil, and how it's really important to actually go out and experience things and not just like like Wallace Wood would also always talk about how he's kind of sentenced to a life of misery because he took on art as a career. And I don't think it has to be that way, but it's kind of up to you to make those decisions.
Yeah, and Mizuki is Shigeru Mizuki is a really interesting counterpoint to Tezuka in that respect, because they were peers. They were working at the same time, and Mizuki died happily, probably surrounded by his grandchildren at like 96 or 97. And in his later years, he told anecdotes about talking with other cartoonists, and meeting with Tezuka, and Tezuka would be like, "Oh, I slept 4 hours last night." And some other cartoonists like, "Oh, I slept 3 hours last night." And Mizuki is like, "Well, I slept 9 hours because that's how long I sleep. I sleep until I'm satisfied, and then I wake up and then I work."
Yeah, he lived 20 years longer than all those guys too, right?
Right, to 20 or 30 years longer. Yeah, he outlived Tezuka by almost 30 years.
Well, and he traveled a lot too. A lot of his book are about traveling and stuff. So he went and
it's not like he wasn't prolific.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he, and I think that you could argue that he had a wider variety of experiences in which to invest his characters and everything. I maybe that's a much broader broader thing and less about formal things, but it's worth considering. I don't think it's ever your lives are valuable,
but it's worth living a life.
It's a problem because that's where you wind up getting so many of these like memoirs or like diary comics, and all it is some guy sitting there complaining about having a hard time getting ideas. That genre's like, Jesus fucking Christ, like, that's such a part of like comics, and yeah, I think that's a part of it. Like, that's all you have to talk about if that's all you're doing. Like, that totally makes sense. So I think it's a not that I think Tezuka's work's bad, but I can see the kind of cookie cutter that Miyazaki's complaining about, and it is a fair criticism. I think it's well observed.
I hope you guys enjoyed that, and if you did, tell your friends, tell your dogs, tell your loved ones, tell your side piece. Oh, did I say that?
The side pieces, yeah.
Tell your grocer that you enjoy this. We're making this for you guys, and the more eyeballs that are on this series, the better. Really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, why don't you go pick up Brandon's fantastic book, Rain Like Hammers. One of me and Carson both our top books of last year. Just really fantastic work, and maybe you'll pick up Strange Death too. Strange Death of Alex Raymond.